I recognize a number of you who attend some of my Kabbalah sessions where we have spoken at length as to what is the primary motivation of life. And in each instance, we've concluded that it's inherent in a word called connectedness, which seems like a strange abstract word to define what others might call a psychological insight. Nevertheless, you know full well that when you lose something, the immediate shock of that registers loudly. It may be a $100 note. And of course, it's not the paper that you've lost, it's something behind the paper that you feel disconnected from, which you had previously a connection to. If it is information and you've lost it, an important piece of paper towards some contractual arrangement, and you've lost it, you feel an immediate sense of disconnectedness. It's not the piece of paper again, it's what it stands for. But in interpersonal relations, and probably the most important connection we have is with each other as human beings. And therefore the connectedness and disconnectedness registers that much more loudly. So when we lose a loved one, even more so is the disconnection registering so much that it actually embeds itself in the very body of our being, right down to our soul. And obviously it takes a long time to adjust to a new relationship, a relationship of absence. Tonight we have 3 individuals who will speak about absence, disconnectedness, loss in their own lives, in the professional lives that they lead as well. And I think it's very, very brave of them to come forward and share their story, share their coping mechanisms, share their perceptions, and perhaps give us strength and capacity to deal with our degrees of disconnectedness in our own lives. So when young ones die, because of the unexpectedness, that disconnectedness is even more powerful. In our Jewish spiritual teachings, we're informed that when someone, God forbid, dies prematurely, it means that the reincarnative soul journey has come to an end. This was the last reincarnation, and that soul needed only this degree of lifetime in a body to complete its cosmic task over many lifetimes. That doesn't make us feel the disconnectedness any less. That's only our cerebral self being provided with a rationale. But the emotions nevertheless remain raw. And tonight is not a night where we necessarily, or I necessarily, am going to develop that as a way of coping with our grief. We have Cynthia Pollak. Cynthia, who heads the Jewish Bereaved Parents group, she's the president. She holds regular functions for bereaved parents to provide support to them. She has visited many parents in their time of need, offering words of condolence and personal reflection, and therefore she's very well suited to share of her experience with us. Second speaker, Reb Leor Broh, who is the spiritual leader of Beit Haroeh at the Mizrahi Center, and is a very sought-after speaker, a wonderful teacher who I have learned personally much from by listening to his shiurim. He himself is a professional, an accountant, and has also suffered loss. Norman Rosenbaum, whom I've known for decades and decades, and was very, very familiar and somewhat close to his younger brother, who was murdered in New York. Some of you might recall the circumstances. I'm not going to elaborate now. Norman himself is a high-profile international tax barrister who also has a reputation for being a legal crusader. He has served in senior roles in the Australian Taxation Office and a lecturer at law at university. They're not here in their professional capacities, they're here in their personal capacities, all three. And I know you've come to listen to their story and learn from it. So I'm going to ask Cynthia to open up and share with us. Cynthia. Would you like to stand?
I'd rather that stand, please. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yes. I can see about 12 familiar faces of other bereaved parents here, so I welcome you and everybody else. Yeah? You can't hear me? Okay. All right. What age is too young to die? Is it 1 year old or 2 or 20 or 30 or 40? There is no number. It is a death out of sequence, an unjust death. An unjust death for parents to experience. An unjust death for a child to lose his big brother or kid sister. I'm here tonight to talk to you about coping strategies and personal reflections as a parent whose child has died. How did I feel when my son Danny died? I actually cannot tell you how it feels when your child dies. I cannot because there are no words to describe it. Well, there are words: anger, denial, fear, despair, guilt, but they're merely words. They don't in any way relate to the depth of pain that you feel when your child dies. Mark Twain, when asked about the death of his daughter, aged 24, responded, "To attempt to communicate about such a loss would bankrupt the languages of the world." And that is so true. For 10 years, from 1999, Danny lived with his spreading, incurable blood vessel cancer. Incurable, I was told, because it was so rare that any research into it did not justify a share of the world's health dollar. That appointment was made 3 days after my mother died from cancer. Over the years, I was told I was prematurely mourning because of my grief, my despair, my fear, while all the time I was putting on a brave face for my darling son, whose life was being measured. One renowned doctor, after spending an hour trying to give me encouragement, shook my hand when we left and offered me his condolences. Even as I'm writing this speech, I'm crying out not just for myself and my son, but for all those parents who are caring for a child with a terminal disease. You cope because you have to, but it can be very, very hard. Many of you will remember, probably more so mothers, what it's like with a very young baby in the home. The child might sleep for 3 hours or 6 hours or even all night, but you lie in bed, not totally asleep, just waiting for that half-expected cry in the middle of the night. For 10 years, I lay in wait for that call. There was never any doubt that it would come. Much has been written about the stages of grief, usually understood to be some combination of shock or disbelief, denial, bargaining, guilt, anger, depression, and acceptance. Knowing how much I knew about Danny's condition, much of which I kept from him, I was already experiencing many of these. When Danny died, my feelings were intensified. But there were 2 other feelings: a much, much, much greater sense of guilt and loneliness. I felt so alone, so abandoned. God, out of everyone in the whole world, why pick on our son? Thank God, my brothers, my niece, my nephews, cousins, friends, all my friends' children, no one, not one, did God strike down. So what is wrong with us? What did we do wrong? Why us? But slowly, over the weeks and the months, we rationalised our guilt. No, it was not because I didn't feed the right foods. No, it had nothing to do with my father-in-law's bowel cancer. We just lucked out. and we saw that there were others who'd been dealt this same horrendous blow. I pointed out this certainly does not lessen our pain. In fact, at times it can cause more anguish. But there's also a measure of comfort in having someone beside you who's been in that same hellhole, someone who knows, who understands, who has felt that same inexplicable depth of despair as you have. So how does one cope as a bereaved parent? Your first all-consuming doubt is, how can you go on living? Then, what if you forget your child? Do relationships change? Where is God in all this? How do you cope with certain comments or questions? Are sometimes worse than others? What are the triggers? And finally, does anything help? Will you cope? The short answer is the old you wouldn't, but a new you will emerge as a different person. You'll never be the same person you were before, but you will reach the point where remembering does not overwhelm you as it did in the beginning, when you were thinking the only thing you could do was to join your beloved. There is no moving on, but there is moving forward, forever changed. You will survive to see the day when you can love and laugh and enjoy pleasures without feeling that you're betraying your child by doing so. There was a feeling of, how can I laugh? How can I be happy now that Danny has died? I didn't want anyone to even see me smiling. I've read that some experts say to allow 1 to 2 years to get to the point where grief is no longer the centre of your awareness. It may then take further time to feel you have gained some semblance of your life before your child died. You may become stronger in some ways as you have withstood the ultimate test that anyone can confront. If anyone asks me how I am, it has taken me years to feel and now to actually admit that I'm feeling okay. But I only just realised the reason I'm okay is because while I live with a massive hole in my heart because of Danny's death, other things don't upset me like they used to. They don't get me down. You no longer fuss over the little things. The cup is chipped, you stained your favourite shirt, MasterChef was rigged. You no longer sweat the small stuff. Your priorities change. To a very minor degree, it's like you lose an arm. You won't ever get over that, but you'll learn to dress with one hand. I am by nature quite stoic. That would be due to my English parentage. But I find now I am both stronger, yet a lot more emotional. Through my involvement with our Jewish bereaved parents group, I have learnt compassion. Others ask me, doesn't it get you down? But no, there's a great shared camaraderie, a wonderful support, a bond so much deeper than any other. And the knowledge that our group is providing this encourages me to help further. The next anxiety to overcome is the fear that you will forget your child, lose those precious moments. I have met a few bereaved people who at the mention of a support group have totally clammed up. One particular lady was adamant that she would not say a single word about her son as it upset her too much. So she has buried her memories together with her child. How sad is that? I thrive on my memories of Danny. I've got photos of Danny all over the house. Having been in a situation that I knew there would be a time where there would be no more photos, I started scrapbooking when Danny was diagnosed. Having made up some excuse about family trees or something and made sure lots of photos were taken. Accepting the death of your child does not mean that you are forgetting your child. Once we start to accept, we can reflect on the happy times we had with our child. Danny is still a part of my life, not here physically, but here in other ways. He is a part of me forever. How can I ever forget him? Sure, the little things. I can't remember who his grade 1 teacher was, or whether he preferred Vegemite or peanut butter on his toast, but I can't remember that about my daughter either. Recently, I passed a second-hand shop and saw some car memorabilia, number plates, car badges, speedometers, things that Danny loved to collect. I stood and wondered what to get for his collection, before remembering Danny is no longer here. At a much earlier stage in my journey through grief, this would have been a trigger to leave me in tears, but now it's a happy memory of something about Danny. My daughter has the not-too-common name Renee. All my grandchildren have not too common names, but Danny or Daniel is quite common. So you can often catch me in a newsagent or a gift shop, searching through the personalised pens, mugs, key tags, etc., looking for his name. I remember Danny's generosity, his consideration, sense of humour, power of persuasion, commitment, and so much more. These are all my ongoing memories of Danny in which I revel. My memories of Danny are impossible for me to forget. He is a part of me and always will be, wherever he is. Death leaves a heartache no one can heal. Love leaves a memory no one can steal. And now on to relationships. Do relationships change? You bet they do. Firstly, for those widowed or divorced with no other half to turn to, I know it's hard, but don't assume it's all that easy for a couple either. Grief is a very personal journey. It may be hard for husband and wife, both suffering, to give support to each other. Men and women grieve differently, and every individual grieves differently. But it is important to accept each other, accept differences, give support, and respect each other's feelings. In our case, sadly, I knew the inevitable, while my husband was adamant, while there is life, there is hope. When Danny died, my husband pretty much went into shock, whereas I had begun mourning when the cancer was diagnosed. Other relationships are affected also, siblings, grandparents, etc., but I won't go into that here. Maybe your child was married and he or she left behind a young widow or widower and your grandchildren. Falling in love, getting married and having a family was the trifecta Danny never thought he would win. He was immensely proud of his family. 3 years later, my daughter-in-law was a young widow, sole breadwinner, sole parent, and the primary link that I had with her, my son, was now gone. What about when the daughter-in-law remarries and moves interstate, and your granddaughter is now living 3,500 kilometres away and calls another man daddy? All this is so very hard to navigate. At least in our support group, we do have others who have gone through all these experiences and more. We can share our knowledge, our journeys, our mistakes, and our successes. What about friendships? At a time when they are most vulnerable, you may find that you have the task of educating others. This may seem highly unfair, often overwhelming, but the reality is that some people have limited experience with death. They have little understanding of the grieving process that you are going through. Some friends will go out of their way, some to help you, some to avoid you. But try not to be bitter, you have enough to deal with. I'm happy with friends I can talk to about Danny, though I know some may feel uncomfortable about it at times, but often I press on regardless and find they overcome their discomfort. No, where is God in all this? Oy vey, I'm standing in a shul, what can I say? My darling Danny was very observant. Although the oncologist once mentioned a certain number of years, which was exactly spot on, Danny and I never discussed his prognosis, but he once commented that he was not afraid of Olam Haba, the afterlife, and that his future was in the hands of God. Personally, I'm confused as to where I stand in regard to my devotion to God, but I have found comfort in the thought that although Danny's physical body has departed, his soul goes on living. In the book, The Jewish Way in Death and Mourning, Maurice Lamb wrote on the front cover, "Death is a night between 2 days. Think about it. I never did before." Rabbi Lamb tells the story of twins, safely closeted in their mother's womb. Suddenly the mother is crying out and one of the boys is ejected. His brother hears his twin screaming and crying, seemingly lost. Will they ever meet up again? And then the second twin emerges and realises that this is not death, but the start of a whole new world. So too is our departure from this world to the next. Last week I watched a video clip about a young rabbi with cancer. He was cured, had a recurrence, was cured, met a girl, is happily married, a nice happy ending. I can tell you a similar story, but it doesn't have a happy ending. For 10 years, people around the world prayed for Danny. Every Shabbos, as I lit my candles, I begged for God to look after Danny. Some may say God did answer and that he gave Danny those 10 extra years. We stand at Danny's gravesite and we cite Kel Maleh Rachamin, a prayer of praise for God. It hurts so much to say it every time. I know that Danny's in a better place. I have absolutely no doubt at all about that. But I miss him. I want him here. I want him with me, with his wife, watching over his growing child, fulfilling the dreams he planned for his future here on earth. Is he still shepping nachas from the beautiful little girl he left 8.5 years ago? In the book of Kohelet, it says, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven, and a time to be born and a time to die." On Rosh Hashanah, we pray to be written in the book of life. We're given 10 days to atone for our sins, to set our lives on the good path. We prayed and we prayed, but it didn't help. I believe God knew when Danny was going to die. I believe God planned it, maybe on the day Danny was born. Yes, I surely believe God exists, but I have to admit I'm not happy with him. How does one cope with certain comments and questions? There's the ever-dreaded first-time meet and greet question, how many children do you have? Everyone develops their own response to this. I often try to sidetrack by answering, I've got a daughter and a son and 5 grandkids, and I hope that puts an end to the query or turns the conversation to grandkids. I remember a conversation with a new hairdresser, and she asked me how many kids did I have. I simply said 2. She then asked, where do they live? I said 1 here and 1 in Perth, and the question continued, what does my son do? Is he married? Any kids, etc.? I didn't go back to that hairdresser. Then there are the platitudes. I know it's not the same, but my great Uncle George, first grade teacher, beloved hamster, died last year. It really meant a lot to me. It's hard to respond to such a comment, but the person's actually trying their best to offer you comfort. They're not deliberately trying to offend, and they don't expect an answer from you anyway. And the inappropriate questions, like those who say, oh, you poor thing, how did they die? That can be particularly uncomfortable if your child took their own life. I know one lady who says she died at night time. There's a blissfully ignorant person who can't understand why you won't go to their daughter's wedding. What? You still haven't got over your son's death? It's been ages already. No, I haven't got over my son's death, and I doubt I ever will. I feel very uncomfortable and I try to avoid social occasions, but recently I had to attend a family bat mitzvah. Why does everybody have to wish everybody else mazel tov? Please don't wish me mazel tov. Don't you understand? I'm not celebrating anything, quite the opposite. My son won't be celebrating his daughter's bat mitzvah. People say things that will upset you all the time. I have a friend who, every time I ring, if I say, hi, how are you, which I try not to, every time her response is, well, I'm still in the land of the living. What am I meant to say to that? How many times do I have to hear it? And yes, I have politely said I find it hard to take, but some people just don't hear you. A few weeks ago, I was sitting at a Shabbos table next to a 17-year-old girl who mentioned she wanted to get into law at uni. My automatic response was, my 2 kids studied law. And then I kicked myself as I realised and waited for her obvious response. Oh, really? What are they doing now? What are the triggers? To name a few. Firstly, Yom Tovim. They're always so hard and can't be avoided. I know our Seders will never be the same. It used to be a mini celebration with the extended family, including my nephews, Danny's cousins, the one he fought with to see who could sing the loudest or finish Echad Mi Yodea the quickest. I'm delighted that these young men are now successful, proud family men. But it hurts. This year I cried over the beautiful silver plate, Seder plate, now in our possession, that Danny got as a wedding present, together with the cherished bookmark he made in prep, the matzah cover in grade 1, and the Afikoman bag in grade 2. Actually, I was a wreck, so I contacted some of my dear friends from the support group, one whose son didn't reach adulthood, one who doesn't get to see or have any contact with her grandchildren, and one whose grandchild sits with her new step-parent, the new step-parent at Bubba's Seder table. I remembered 2 other friends from our group whose children died during the week of Pesach. I try to be strong, go back to my normal thinking, happy we had Danny in our lives for 29 years. But at times like this, it's hard to keep the tears from falling. Danny was 29, bar mitzvahed, graduated, married. He'd reached these coming-of-age milestones. But I feel for those whose child died earlier, to watch their child's peers graduate, start dating, become young adults. And I feel for those who have younger children who approach and surpass the age at which their beloved child died. How hard that must be. What do I avoid? I avoid going to a movie or reading a book if I know there is a sad death. I love crossword puzzles, the thrill of getting one finished. But if there are any words relating to death and burial, I can't pencil them in. I have to leave them out. Danny's birthday on September the 6th always brings a tear, and his yahrzeit is a week before Rosh Hashanah. So from now for the next 6 weeks, I dread looking at the calendar. So, what helps? Sometimes your friends want to help but don't know how. Ask them, call them, talk to them, let them know. Sometimes even your closest friends are afraid to do or say the wrong thing. Don't feel uncomfortable about your dependence on them right now. Take comfort knowing that they care about you. Take comfort also from other bereaved parents. They have something many of your friends don't possess. Sadly, they have experience. They are examples of parents who have been through and survived what you may now be going through yourself. Most of us will rejoin society over time. I personally suffered from panic attacks for 15 years. I didn't go to restaurants, movies, my children's concerts or graduations. Then suddenly I found myself in the consulting room at Peter Mac, being told my son had cancer. The only treatment for the tumours was a removal of the affected site. Not possible in Danny's case, as his knee, shoulder, both hips, some ribs, spine, collarbone and lungs already had active tumours. For the next 10 years, I prayed on every word the bevy of specialists would say, praying for a glimmer of hope. My anxieties were now focused solely on Danny's health, not my own nervousness. My standing here, making a speech, drawing me back into the reality of life. It takes time, and everyone has to find their own path. So go easy on yourself. The most important thing is that you give yourself time to grieve. There are no rules. There is no such thing as grief etiquette, no expectations, no right or wrong way. The circumstances of death, nature of your relationship with your child, any previous experience you had with death or other hardships, the strength of your network, and your current life circumstances, all these are factors which will be in effect. But gradually, with the help of family, friends and professionals, you will learn to live with your loss and eventually have a normal life again. Give yourself permission to do what you feel like doing, as long as you harm no one. Cry, alone or with others. Pray, scream, withdraw, express anger, meditate, cry some more. It may be hard accepting words of sympathy, but remember it's the thought that counts, not necessarily the words. Where can you get help? It is said that the single most important factor in healing from loss is having the support of other people. Even if you aren't comfortable talking about your feelings under normal circumstances, it's important to express them when you're grieving. Sharing your loss makes the burden of grief easier to carry. Wherever the support comes, accept it and do not grieve alone. Connecting to others will help you heal. Some people feel the need to be in touch with Hashem at this time, while others feel rejected. But belonging to a shul and being part of that community will provide much-needed spiritual support. I know many people see a counsellor and it helps them. Personally, I saw various counsellors throughout Danny's illness and none of them helped, so this does not strike a positive chord with me, though others have benefited from it immensely. Many will disagree, but I find it hard to imagine that someone who has not experienced the death of a child can really understand the depth of despair a bereaved parent endures. But it is important to have someone to talk to, if you can find the right person. Ask around, shop around, and find someone you can relate to and who you feel comfortable and confident with. I must point out that my situation, how I felt and reacted and continue to react, having had a child with a terminal illness for 10 years with ongoing medical problems, is vastly different from those whose child died suddenly unexpectedly. I developed and maintained an international registry for people with Danny's rare cancer. Over the 10 years, quite a few members died. I remember a girl, Danny's age, asking me if I wanted her mum to let me know when she died. I spoke to many such parents and spouses over the 10 years. Somehow when Danny died, I felt I didn't need someone who had not gone through what I had to tell me how to deal with Danny's death. But having said that, I do have a wonderful GP who might not be able to comfort me over my loss, but has become a valued confidant, and I always benefit from chatting with her. So you do need someone you can talk to. After the initial early response to grief and offers to help, friends and relatives usually begin to pick up their own lives. Parents are left to deal with their grief alone. And you do feel so alone when your child has died, so singled out by adverse fate, so bereft in a world of happy, intact families. Then join a support group and you will realise how many other people like you there are out there. I had previously been involved with 2 support groups for my panic attacks, and both made me feel worse. So setting up and running a support group for bereaved parents was certainly not something I had ever intended to do. Having had panic attacks for 15 years, standing here in front of this crowd was also something I never envisaged. So how did it all come about? The short answer is that another bereaved mother and I contacted a few other bereaved parents and got together with a professional grief counsellor for peer-to-peer support, once a month for about a year, similar to the Compassionate Friends, a non-denominational bereavement support group. But this was not what I wanted. I wanted the bereaved parents to get together and not solely discuss different approaches to mourning. I wanted us to share a meal, play some Scrabble, go on an excursion, do exercises, do normal things like we used to among special friends. Earlier this year, I officially incorporated Jewish Bereaved Parents, Inc. We do a lot of activities, which I'm happy to talk to anybody about later. I have personally benefited manyfold, forming new relationships, helping others, seeing their growth, my own growth. As the president, I have stepped outside my comfort zone, acquired overwhelming compassion, and developed unexpected leadership skills. I don't know why, I can't really explain it, but somehow learning about the experience of others gives insight into your own story. Sharing with those who are also bereaved has a special meaning. I am indebted to many in our support group who tell me they visit Danny's grave when they go to Lyndhurst for their own son. I admit, when we go to visit Danny, I don't do the social rounds. And for some reason, Danny is nowhere near where all the others are. But last time I did, I took a handful of pebbles and visited the graves of the children from our group, many of those who were buried there. It was a profound journey, made all the more poignant by me having to go back and get another handful of pebbles to visit all our children. The bittersweet emotion was that through my involvement with our group, I really feel like I knew each and every one of those precious souls. Some light relief. What am I, Mushugasim? I like to wear a couple of ordinary rope bracelets. Danny's favourite colour was blue, so the blue one represents his life, and the black is in commemoration of his death. Certainly nothing too fancy. I don't want anyone complimenting me on my personal symbolic bracelets and telling me how pretty they look. They are for me and me alone. And another one. Jewish law prohibits tattoos, and I wouldn't normally have considered it, but now I do. But I can't. However, when I mentioned this to a friend, she said, "Ooh, that would hurt," as if the pain is not there already. Anyway, when Danny needed radiotherapy, he refused a tiny pinprick of a tattoo as a marker because it is forbidden. So I won't ever get a tattoo. But every summer there's an outdoor market in St Kilda and I get a beautiful henna design on my shoulder with Danny's name. You don't want to know me for that fortnight. I don't wash that shoulder at all. As mentioned, I never set up to run a support group, but here I am. And I do have to admit to being proud of the group, proud of every member who makes that effort to accept help from each other, as well as offer support for newcomers. I'm amazed at the rewards. When we packed some 600 gift bags for sick kids, our pride and satisfaction was so evident you could almost package that too. The overall benefits to all of us has amazed me. The members of the group are all inspired to think more of others in need, a far cry from where many of them were when they first joined. What does upset me is that I know there are many people who would benefit by our group, any group, if they would only give it a try. It's upsetting that there are people desperately needing help, but they won't or can't accept it. This has been a part of the reason why I'm now in the process of writing a book. Its title is After the Death of Your Child, A Jewish Mother's Perspective. I hope to get some grants and will distribute the book to Haroeh Kadisha, Beit, all the shuls and temples throughout Australia, to be given freely to every newly bereaved Jewish parent. A little sideline. I received a very encouraging letter from one of the rabbis who I approached asking his opinion about my planned project to write this book. The response was very praiseworthy and encouraging. For weeks I left his letter on my kitchen table, face up, so Danny would have a chance to read it. I want to finish up with another story about which I will add some in my group of bereaved parents don't feel the same, but it's where I am at now or where I try to be. The story is not about despair or grief or anger. It's about love. In mid-1990s, one of my work colleagues and his wife had their first child. Each day, Philip kept us up to date with baby Gabriel's progress. One day, Philip didn't come to work, and we were all shocked to hear that baby Gabriel died. 2 months later, the office was filled with Christmas cheer. Philip was back at work, and I had a good working relationship with him, but I didn't want to upset him by wishing him season's greetings, as I was keenly aware of his loss. But Philip surprised me by giving me a Christmas present. I was taken aback and embarrassed and explained that I didn't think he would want to acknowledge Christmas this year, let alone celebrate it, having recently suffered such a loss. Philip was all the more outstanded. "Oh no," he replied. "We were so blessed this year. God gifted Gabriel to us for 8 precious months." I try to have this attitude also. I do mourn for Danny desperately, but I try to focus on the gift we all shared for those 29 years. There are times when I am down. Indeed, my life has been turned upside down. But for most of the time, I don't look at Danny's photos and weep, but I look at the many photos of him all around my house and smile. I'm so very proud and privileged to have had Danny in my life. He was truly a precious gift. I'm almost reluctant to end this speech. If there are any counsellors in this room, I don't know if they'll tell me I spoke well or offer me a consultation. But I will end now with one request. Please cherish your kids every single day. Thank you.
It's so enlightening and wonderful to have someone speak who speaks from not just her own experience and her own very sad loss, but is in contact with so many others. And no doubt it filters through in the wisdom of the words that Cynthia shared with us. Thank you so much. I'm going to call upon Reb Leor Broh now to share with us his insights from his difficult challenge that he had to face.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you, Spiritgrow, for having this evening. I want to first say that the bereavement group is doing an act of Gemilas Chasodim, Gemilas Chesed, a tremendous kindness that is being given to the community, and I think it should be acknowledged. Although I'm not part of that group, that doesn't mean I haven't got intention to join it. I just wanted to make people aware about the fact that the greatness of Gemilas Chesed is expressed in respect of someone who passes away. The greatest act of chesed, of kindness that can be done, is in respect of someone who's gone. As we say, the chesed shel emes, the true kindness, is that what one does with people that are gone. We just finished Tisha B'Av. You don't want to hear long drushes, but there was a great man called Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai who was once walking with one of his contemporaries, I think Reb Shimon, and they walked by and they saw the temple destroyed. And Rabbi Shimon said, "Oi," he said, "Oi, we've lost we've lost the temple. We've lost the ability to atone for our sins, to have a kapara. All the karbanot are gone. And Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai said, no, we don't. We still have something very great. We have the capacity of Gemilut Chesed. And he said the capacity of doing kind deeds is equivalent to the karbanot, if not greater. And therefore, with that, I'll just open up and talk briefly, I hope, about the loss that I had, which is going back so many years now to 1980, 1982. There is actually a booklet that was made that we recently discovered. It's called Sunset in the Afternoon. It begins with one section called The Morning, one section called The Afternoon, and one section called The Night. My brother was called Eli Broh. I'm supposed to give inspiration and I'm feeling like I need it. I'm sorry. He was diagnosed in 1980 with brain cancer. And the news came through to my parents. They were sitting on Erev Tisha B'Av at the Suda HaMavseket. So if you ever think about Hashgacha Pratis, if you ever think about timing, you can't get a time like that. Erev Tisha B'Av, to hear the news that one's son, one's brother, has been diagnosed with a brain tumor and that surgery was cried. The phone call came through as we were sitting at the table. That's after months and months and months of doctors prescribing new pairs of glasses for his double vision, which they thought was just a matter of an eye problem. And I suppose 35 years ago, doctors could be forgiven for thinking that because they've gone a long way since. So over and over, new pairs of glasses were prescribed. And one clever physician, I think at Monash or Melbourne, said, no, I think a CAT scan's required, and they found pressure behind the eye. It was, of course, a tumour, and that's when the decision to make an operation. Operation was successful, and tumour was removed, but the doctors said that there's no guarantee it won't come back again. It did come back again. And when it came back with such a vicious growth that there was no way you could stop it. And it was just a matter of watching and waiting. So it was on the 6th day of Tammuz, the English date was the 27th of June, 1982. The phone rang at 3 a.m. My dad was told the end has come. His son has passed away. In a few months, my brother would have been 19 years of age. So I must tell you that I took it much better than my parents. You see, for me it's a brother. For a parent is a son. It's a child. And I think it should be pointed out there's a big difference. I'll tell you something very interesting. The time for Shiva is 7 days, regardless of who you lose. But the time for mourning differs. There is only one relative for which the mourning period is 12 months. And that's a father and a mother. Or a mother. No one else. No one else. If a person loses a son, daughter, brother, sister, the mourning period extends to the end of 30 days. And that's it. Shloshim. End of Shloshim, no restrictions. But for a parent, it continues for 12 months. So someone asked once, why is it that for a child, it's only 30 days? When a person buries their parents, it's the natural order of the world. But when a parent buries a child, it's unnatural. It doesn't make sense. Totally unnatural. So you would think if anyone deserved to have a 12-month period, it would be a parent that lost a child. And yet it's not the case. It's only 30 days. So there were two answers that are given, or there are many answers that are given. One or two that I don't like and I'm not going to share. But one or two that I do like, and I'll share with you, is one of them is that the period of mourning is not just mourning. It's called kavod. It's called honor. You only have to honor your parents. Kibud av va'em. There is no mitzvah in the Torah to honor any other relative than your parents. Of course, we show respect, love, affection, but the true kavod is for your parents and parents only. And they deserve the 12-month period, and that's all. But there is another answer, which you may even like better, and that is that they didn't want to extend it beyond 30 days because, as opposed to other types of mourning, when a parent loses a child, there's no end to the mourning. It never ends. As you've heard from Cynthia, I think, too. So, what are some of the questions that arise? Well, the question, where is God in the picture? What happens to one's emunah? Another question. We think sometimes, what would have happened to that child if they would have had a chance to live, marry, have children, grandchildren? And one's thoughts become full of these type of thoughts. One's mind becomes full of these thoughts. And if you dwell upon it, it can be very depressing. So I turn for comfort to the Torah. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I do. I'll give you one example. There's a man in Chumash who lost his wife over 50 years before he passed away. Who is that? Anyone know? Yaakov. Abraham lost his wife Sarah. 127. It's a pretty old age. Not in those days, maybe. Abraham lived for more than 50 years after that. And when he lost his wife, the beginning of Chayei Sarah begins with the words, Vayu Chayei Sarah, and the life of Sarah was Mea Shana, Esrim Shana, Besheva Shanim, Yemei Chayei Sarah, Shnei Chayei Sarah. The years of Sarah were 127 years, the years of Sarah. What's puzzling about that is the repetition of those words, the years of Sarah. Why repeat that at the end? Shnei Chayei Sarah. And one of the most beautiful commentaries that I like on that is the commentary of the Rechaim HaKodesh, living in the 1700s, who gave the following comment. Avram could have turned to God and said, God, if you let my wife live a bit longer, think of what she could have accomplished. Think of how much more good she could have brought to this world. Think of the amazing things that she could have done for the next 50, 60 years that I lived, or I will live. So Hashem answered by those three words, Shnei Chayei Sarah. As if to say, you're telling me what she could have accomplished? Whatever she could have accomplished, I'm putting it in the bag for her. When she gets to see me, consider everything done. Everything that she could have done, I consider it done. She died of no fault of her own. Shnei Chayei Sarah understands the Rechaim HaKodesh to be, these are the years that I will add to Sarah's life. Consider it as full as yours. Consider it as full as anything. No one dies because of their own fault. Hashem takes it away. Hashem says, I give as well. Consider every life, every year that she would have lived. I put it in the bank account for her. That's hers. We also look for comfort to stories. Stories about people. I just mentioned one, Avraham and Sarah. There is a man, and I cannot remember his name. He was a great rabbi. He lost a child. I can't remember the circumstances either. And they asked him, how do you cope? So he said, I walk down the street and imagine if someone comes and whacks me on the back really hard. I'd go and turn around and I'd want to belt him. But then I see, it's a good friend of mine. The smack was a bit harder, but he was a good mate of mine. I embrace him. I said, oh boy, that was a hard whack. But I know it came from a friend. I know it came from someone who loves me. So he said, God whacked me, but I know he loves me too. So I'll take his whack. And that's the way he dealt with it. Not everyone is big enough to deal with that. It's a great rabbi called Reb Leor Broh. Reb Leor Broh became a mashgiach in one of Geri yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael. Extraordinary man. Lost his whole family, killed in the Holocaust. But the final straw was when they took his daughter and murdered his daughter in front of his eyes. And students asked him, how do you cope? Because he became a great teacher. Thousands of students went under his hands. So often he got asked that question, how do you cope? How do you cope? So there was a bottle on the table and there was a cork on the bottle. He took the cork off and he put it in his hands. And he said to the people, where's the cork? They said, well, it's in your hands. He said, that's right, it is. Imagine if someone walks into the room now and says, where's the cork? Will he find it? And the students said, no, they won't. What happens if we tell them to search hard? No, they won't find it. Why is it? And Reb Leor Broh explained, because I know the cork's in my hand. I don't have to search. Some people's attitude is, I can't find God, I can't search for him. Where is he? Why did this happen? The truth is, if we try to answer those questions, we will find ourselves at great difficulty. But Reb Leor Broh explained, God was with him the whole time. If I know he's with me, I don't have to search for him. If I have questions that I can't answer, it doesn't shake my faith at all. We've said it before, and Cynthia mentioned it as well. The neshama is everlasting. And neshama is also the same letters as Mishnah. That's why we learn Mishnah for someone who's passed away. Because one of the greatest things you can do for a neshama, nun shin mem hey, is to learn Mishnah. The neshama is everlasting, and so is the Mishnah. And it makes an amazing effect, which we don't understand down here. But upstairs things are different. Third thing that I use for comfort is the fact that other people have, so many people have this same loss. Now remember, again, the people experience things in different ways. Now when Eli, my brother, passed away, my father didn't want to see pictures of him. If there was a video or anything shown, he didn't turn away. It was like a dagger in the heart to see a picture. Mum was different. Mum was happy to see it. She was much stronger in that sense. And in fact, after she lost her son, she would actually offer comfort to others and say, if you've got a problem, come to me. I've been through hell. I can help you. She was strong. But not everybody's like that. Everyone deals with it differently. So you handle it differently. To those who need to be reminded, they get reminded. Those who don't want to be reminded, there's no point. And perhaps one of the greatest things, I think, as a source of comfort is the fact that we keep busy. Keeping busy is the best way of stopping worries. There was a great rabbi, I think it was the Kotzker Rebbe, who told his students, I don't want you to keep away from sin because it's wrong. I want you to keep away from sin because you don't have time to sin. Think about it. If you're busy and you get involved in life, you just don't have time to dwell and to become depressed. Now, some might say that's an escapist attitude, but it's not. An escapist attitude would be to do that right from the beginning. But Hashem gives us time to grieve, and that's the whole function of the Shiva house. It's the function of the Shloshim. It's the function of 12 months for a parent. It's to grieve. But after that's done, we're not allowed to grieve, at least not in the same way. Yes, the loss is there. But life goes on, and you get so busy in life itself that you don't find yourself time to get depressed. That's extremely important. And I'm sure that's not just a Jewish attitude, it's probably an attitude that's just plain common sense. I'm going to finish. I'm going to stop here. I just want to apologize the fact that I'm going to leave a little bit earlier, maybe even if this finishes earlier, and that's because I've got a mother who's not well. She should have a refuah shlema, tikva basara, and you can also add capital Tehillim for her. And that's Hashem. We should have this next function in a different place, different time, and in Yerushalayim with the third Beis HaMikdash. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. I think we all sensed that it was not easy for him to share and to come out on a platform like this in a public arena and do so only says how important he thinks his experience is important, even overcoming his own obvious reticence and the fact that it may have been decades old, it's as raw as today. So really very much appreciate it. Norman Rosenbaum, as I mentioned earlier, is publicly well known. But it's in his private capacity, very personal capacity, that we have invited him to speak here this evening, and I'll let him speak for himself.
They usually say they keep the best to last. I'm very concerned I'm about to destroy that adage. I'd like to thank Label, Rabbi Schmerling, for inviting me here this evening. When Rabbi Schmerling first contacted me, he explained that they were having a series, and the particular evening he wanted me to address was entitled Coping Strategies and Personal Reflections, People Who Die Suddenly. And he goes, after all, because you've gone through it. I said, which example are you thinking of? He goes, your brother, of course. He goes, why? I said, well, without wanting to make light of a very serious topic, my brother was murdered. My father had a massive heart attack, died immediately. My wife died from an aortic aneurysm. I said, so I'm very well qualified. Who do you want me to deal with? And he got a shock. He goes, you seem to be coping very well with it. I said, but I can't talk about it. It's not the type of topic which lends itself to being spoken about. As I was walking in here tonight, I was speaking to some people who themselves have lost a child. And one of the things which was, Reb Leor made the point, and Cynthia made the point, 100% right. I may have lost a brother, I may have lost my father, I may have lost my wife. It's not the same as losing a child. And people go to me, well, how can you say that when you haven't lost a child? Let me assure you, one of the worst, if not the worst experiences I had in my life was having to tell my parents that their son had been murdered. That puts it all into perspective. Now, notwithstanding my experiences, I'm really not qualified to talk about coping. And I'm certainly, my personal reflections may be interesting to some people. Probably the most I can do is talk about some of the experiences which I've had over the years and some of the observations which I've had to make. And to put it all in perspective, it's against a backdrop in one of my communal activities. I worked for the Melbourne Chevra Kadisha in an honorary capacity. And for the last 28 years, my function is to be one of the pro bono lawyers where there is a interest of the coroner to have an autopsy of a person, to offer our services, and to make an application under the Coroner's Act to prevent the autopsy. Now, that legislation in Australia was introduced in Victoria first of all by a former colleague of mine, the late Haroeh. And in that capacity, I've come across a lot of people, not just within the Jewish community. I've represented people from the Aboriginal community, Buddhists, humanitarians. And the one thing which comes across is the value they put on life. And I think you would have got from Cynthia and Reb Leor, it's the value of life. I remember being at the Shloshim for the late Rebbetzin Gutnick, who unfortunately was knocked over and killed by a car in New York. And Rabbi Chaim Gutnick got up in Elwood Shul. I'd actually been in New York at the time. And 30 days later, I was back in Australia, and he got up in Elwood Shul and he made the point, he goes, never miss out on the opportunity to tell your loved ones that you in fact love them. And it resonated with a packed shul. Certainly in coping with death, premature death, untimely death. I've never heard of a timely death. Probably the one exception, a friend of mine, his mother died at 103, was very much with it right to the end. I remember going to the minyan, the first Shachris minyan, and people were coming up to him and saying they were giving condolences, and quite rightly so. And he was not just philosophical, he was just so positive. He said, my mum led a great life. The only disappointment, the only thing, my father died 38 years before she did. She saw her children married, she saw grandchildren, she saw great-grandchildren, she celebrated smachot. She was active in communal matters. She had an active social life. She had a great time. And he took a look at her death as something not positive in the act itself, but he coped with it in looking at and grasping onto the positive aspects. And one of the things I can tell you that I've certainly experienced in terms of coping, that's what you do. You grasp and you hold and you cherish and you look for the positives, all those good memories, all those good times. Because I can tell you now, if you think about the not so good times, depression will be a good day. They say nothing good comes from it. Indeed, they're right. There's no right or wrong way to mourn. There's no right or wrong way to miss somebody. My experience has been that it's better for people to open up, to speak, whether it be close friends, whether it be in a support group, whether it be to a counsellor. But for the person who can't do that, who just can't express themselves, or they don't want to express themselves, or by raising their beloved one who's passed away, it hurts just so much. I think the expression before, which was used, like a dagger in their heart. That person's not wrong. We as individuals who are there, one step removed, are there to support them. And that's very important. That word which Cynthia used in the course of her address to you resonated with me. Support. When Cynthia said she was writing a book, I always joke that I'm going to write a book as well. It's called Dumb Things People Say Without Malice or Forethought During Shiva. And I've had some classics. Absolute crackers. We come home, my wife has just died, people had heard about it, people have been saying Tillim, we're talking about in the space of 2 hours. People have come home from the Alfred Hospital, walk in, my mother's there, person walks up to my mother, we thought it was you. My mother was terrific. She goes, no, wasn't me. I said, know what to say? They just didn't know what to say. Now, we're laughing at it then, and my mother sort of summed it up really well. In criminal law, there's an expression, less is more. In other words, the less you say, the more it's appreciated, the more beneficial it's going to be for you. It's interesting. Reb Leor referred to Haroeh, and it actually says in Shulchan Aruch that when you go to comfort a mourner, to Menachem Ovel, a mourner, you as the person visiting the mourner does not commence the conversation. The conversation is to be initiated by whom? The mourner. And the more I think about it, it goes back to something Cynthia said. And for those people who are going, is this guy only going to do quote the other speakers? Well, when they take what you've prepared, it gives you a license to refer to them quite liberally. And I'll have no fear of or hesitation in doing so. But the reason is, the most important thing is for the mourners to know you're there. Your action of being there, your physical presence, speaks volumes and certainly is far more effective in communicating the important things than any words you may utter. Because between you and me, there are no words, irrespective of who the deceased is in the relationship to the mourner, whether it be a parent, whether it be a child, whether it be a sibling. There's not a way in the world that anything you're going to do or say is going to make it all better. It's just not. But being there does make a difference. The people care. It's called the care factor. And when you go and take a look at what a loss, and Label in his opening comments referred to two things. He goes, coping with the loss and the absence. In listening to Cynthia, I think one point which is very important for those people who have either been directly affected by death or have been close to others who have been affected. You'll realise often that while the departed loved one is no longer with us physically, they're very much part of our lives on a daily basis. And the notion of they're gone or they're forgotten just doesn't ring true. I remember the night when my brother had died. I went to my friend's place to tell them. And my mother said to me, "It will never be the same." And for once in my life, I actually been very philosophical. I immediately retorted back to it, and it's not supposed to be the same. It's just not supposed to be. Doesn't mean you're going to be miserable for the rest of your life. And I remember saying to my mother was in tears, I said, "You know Yankel wouldn't want you to cry. He wouldn't want you to be upset. He wouldn't want anybody to be upset with him dying." And she goes to me through the tears, "I know." And then I couldn't help myself. I said, "But he wouldn't want you to forget him either." And then she started laughing. So you got these tears coming down and laughing. Why? Because he not only was, still is, very much a part of all our lives. And in terms of coping, it's to embrace what you have, not to miss what you haven't got. In speaking about and concerning a departed one, as I said, there's no right or wrong way. But I think, as I mentioned before, grasping onto the positives is very important. I always tell the story in my brother's case. As you know, he was murdered in New York. We heard about it on the Tuesday night, Melbourne time. His body didn't come back till the Friday. Friday morning, we went to Tullamarine, picked up the body with the Chevra Kadisha, went back there'd been a Tahara done in New York. They had to prepare the body for burial. And those days, those 3 days, were very trying. There's no question about it. The funeral was on the Friday. We sat in the afternoon. We commenced sitting Shiva that afternoon, got up for Shabbos and Saturday night. Saturday night, all of my brother's friends were around at my parents' place. You would have thought it was comedy night. People left with tears, but tears of joy. I've never heard so many stories about my brother. I still hear about them today. And the thing which I'm happy about is that as a result of speaking in such affectionate terms, funny terms, stories, he was a character, it brings real comfort to my mother today, as it did to my late father before he passed away. And it was the positiveness of it all. Too often, the one word which I despise, my mother hates, is the word closure. Cynthia went through a number of awkward and uncomfortable positions. And can I tell you, she came up with, I thought I'd heard them all, but she's actually outdone me. There are a couple of them I haven't come across before, but let me assure you, I could imagine them. And it's not because the people are insensitive or they don't care, but they really don't know what to say. And in a way, as I said before, less is more. Sometimes they'd be far better off just not to say anything. But being there, probably the one line which I've heard numerous times, which unfortunately is true, when people say, there's nothing I can say, just nothing. And they're right. But the fact that they're there and they've recognised that, all of a sudden you feel as there's somebody there who actually gets it. They understand. They appreciate. Now, certainly we look at opportunities to do the right thing. And there are numerous times, whether it be the Shiva or whether it be the Shleishim or a Yartzeit, one of the things I believe is that we've got to try, if we're put in the position of being, unfortunately, mourning the loss of somebody, is that we don't set our expectations on ourselves too high, and those who are coming to comfort us similarly don't do the same thing. Because one of the difficulties is that as well balanced and as well thought out and rational and logical and dispassionate you might be, let me assure you, and I say this from first-hand experience, you're not in a position to think things through in that rational, logical, sophisticated manner that you usually deal with other things. And I always give two examples. When my father, he had his heart attack on a Friday afternoon. When I said before he died immediately, he actually had lost consciousness. He then started breathing after about 20 minutes, but he never regained consciousness. He was taken to the Alfred. We had to decide what we were going to do. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What were we going to do? And it's interesting that yardstick or measuring stick was the same principle which we applied in regard to my brother. People before heard that, where was God? And again, I must say, when Cynthia made the comment that she's not very happy with God at the moment, I'll go a bit further. I think some of his decisions are absolutely terrible. I've got another word, but we're in a shul. I won't use that either. But it's interesting when I think about God's decisions, I'm reminded of my grandmother, my mother's mother. Now, after the death of my brother, unfortunately, my mother sat Shiva a second time in 2 weeks. Her mother died. But my grandmother, and I always say that my brother's murder killed her, but she was a very wise lady, my grandmother. And she always used to say, not necessarily about my brother, she used to go, can't be too bad in Gan Eden. She'd go, nobody's ever come back, and more importantly, they've never come back complaining. He goes, she used to say in Yiddish, with unsere, with our people, if there was a complaint to be made, we'd have plenty of complainers. But in regard to having that logical approach to everything, I remember with my father, we had to make the decision what we're going to do with Shabbos. I said my father would have wanted us to go home and make Shabbos. Not that him being hooked up to all these machines was exactly the type of environment you wanted to go and celebrate Shabbos in, but we went home. And as soon as we got home, we got a call, we should come back to the hospital. So my mother immediately took a taxi back, and I was actually in the shower Like, by the time I got out of the shower, it was already Shabbos, so I went and asked the Shayla. I asked exactly the wrong Shayla. Instead of asking, the Shayla I should have asked would have allowed me to get back, take a cab back to the hospital. I asked the rabbi the wrong question. Idiot me. And let me assure you, I'm the one who would always tell everybody else the right question to ask. So in a 32-degree January heat, I walked back to the Alfred Hospital. And unfortunately, my father already died by the time I was there. The difficulty is that you're not yourself. As well as you might think you're coping, you're not. As rational as you think you may be, you're not. And as logical as you think you may be, you're definitely not. And just to show you that I'm at least consistent with my inability to cope with these things, when it came to my late wife, often I've stopped many autopsies. And unfortunately, the way in which the system works, it takes time, it takes days. And often I've had family ask me the question, should we just let the coroner do the autopsy and so we can have a quick burial? Which is not an unreasonable thing, because the speed of having a burial is paramount in halacha. And my answer invariably is ask your rabbi. Now I know the answer. The answer is no. There are some exceptions, but the general answer is no. My wife died on a Sunday night. By Wednesday I was asking the same question. I knew what the answer was. I'm asking a rabbi exactly the same question. Not that I ridicule other people of making, but I think to myself, everybody knows the answer. In terms of coping, don't ever underestimate what is playing into your life which was not present ever before. The point which I'd like to finish with is this. When we look at coping mechanisms, as I said, the one thing, there is no right or wrong way, but I'd encourage people to always look for the positive. In terms of how do we console those who've experienced the loss, less is more. Thank you very much.